Across the globe, 2.3 billion Christians celebrate the birth of Jesus on December 25th. Inspired by the tale of wise Persian magi following a star to find the Messiah. But what if this cherished story is more myth than fact? Join us as we delve into the mystery of the Christmas star. Was it a real astronomical event or a symbolic part of a deeper narrative? In this documentary, we explore ancient texts, astronomical theories, and cultural lore to uncover the truth behind this legendary star. Get ready to challenge what you know and discover the hidden layers of this timeless story.
Night. As predictable as a sunrise, when the sun sets and the land becomes dark, the sky reveals its true self. On a cloudless night, the heavens are speckled with light, carrying with them the shimmering echoes of space and time. The naked eye finds numerous points of light, the suns of countless other worlds, maybe even worlds with people looking at our sun as one more point in the inky blackness of their night sky. We do not know if or where they are, or what stories they might have about their sky, but we know of another people who did craft tales about the lights in the sky, our ancestors. Millennia ago, people around the world found patterns in the sky, regularities in the heavens, and ways to predict times of warmth and cold. Among the things they observed is that there were times that a day was longer than a night, and sometimes a night longer than a day. The times of the year when the night was longer were colder, and the shortest days fit into the season of winter. Near the shortest of those days, billions of people hold celebrations, a tradition with great antiquity, though normally for different holidays. Today, the great celebration is Christmas. While Christmas is not on the shortest day of the year, its closeness is perhaps symbolic for many, as the light of the world was born in the time of greatest darkness. But then again, was Jesus really born in a lowly lodging in the town of Bethlehem on December 25th of the year 1 BCE? What of the Christmas traditions are based on real history? What are legendary accretions? And might the science of astronomy answer these questions? At this time of year, there's another tradition, especially in America, where the science education institutions known as planetariums try to answer these questions, and their presentations have been repeated for nearly a century. However, this is Myth Vision, and we will look at the best that history, science, and mythology can do to figure out what is real about Christmas. Traditional accretions. Let's start with the date of Jesus' birth. Turning to your Bibles and looking at chapter 2 of the Gospel of Luke, you will see the date is given as, well, there isn't one at all. In fact, no gospel says when Jesus was born. The best we can tell, no one has even associated December 25th with the birth of Jesus until the 3rd century, and the clearest evidence of the association doesn't exist until the year 350, long after the composition of the New Testament. Other early Christian sources give many other dates for Jesus' birth, from April to November, as indicated by the writings of Clement of Alexandria. And what about the Christmas card imagery of the baby in a manger, surrounded by animals, especially an ox and donkey? While the laying of Jesus in a manger is biblical, see Luke 2:7. The animals are from the apocryphal Gospels in a document claiming to be a Latin translation of the original Hebrew document written by the disciple Matthew. We are presented with this imagery for the first time. These two animals were actually not random, but were a fulfillment of Scripture. According to this other Gospel of Matthew, quoting from Isaiah 1:3, the ox knoweth his master, and the ass his master's manger. This interesting gospel, however, is certainly not from the same author as the Gospel of Matthew found in Bibles today, and instead the book is usually called the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. But perhaps we should add it into the Bible, since it also makes baby Jesus into a dragon tamer. And having come to a certain cave and wishing to rest in it, the Blessed Mary dismounted from her beast and sat down with the child Jesus in her bosom. And there were with Joseph 3 boys, and with Mary a girl, going on the journey along with them. And lo, suddenly there came forth from the cave many dragons, and when the child saw them, They cried out in great terror. Then Jesus went down from the bosom of his mother and stood on his feet before the dragons, and they adored Jesus. Praise the Lord from the earth, you dragons, ye dragons, and all you deeps. Psalm 148:7. And the young child Jesus, walking before them, commanded them to hurt no man. But Mary and Joseph were very much afraid lest the child should be hurt by the dragons. And Jesus said to them, Do not be afraid. Do not consider me to be a little child, for I am and always have been perfect, and all the beasts of the forest must needs be tame before me. Gospel of Pseudo Matthew, chapter 18. More additions would come into the story of Jesus' birth, fleshing out the details left by the canonical accounts of the Nativity. For example, who were those strange wise men from the east who visited the young child, as first mentioned in Matthew chapter 2? Their names, their number, and their land of origin are not given. However, by the 6th century, the tradition was that there were 3 wise men. Their names were Balthazar, Melchior, and Gaspar. The latter would then become Caspar, as there was a missed stroke of the stylus and a G became a C. In one tradition, their lands of origin were Arabia, Persia, and India, respectively. However, other traditions have as many as 12 wise men visit baby Jesus. What of these names? Balthazar was one of the names given to the prophet Daniel, the same Daniel who predict the killing of a Messiah and the coming of the Son of Man in the clouds. Next, Melchior is a combination of Hebrew words, melech and or meaning king and light. In other words, the king of light would follow a new light in the sky to find the light of the world. As for Caspar, his original name of Gaspar probably comes from the Hebrew term for treasure, gizbar, which fits well with the gift-giving wise men. Also noteworthy, the 3 wise men were not originally called kings. That also was a later addition, and it probably comes from reading from Isaiah 60, 1-3. Arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. But the Lord shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. And the Gentiles shall come to thy light, and kings to the brightness of thy rising. Gentile kings coming to the rising light sounds like a pretty good connection to the Bethlehem star rising as a light to the Gentile wise men from the east. In fact, later in Isaiah 60, 2 of the gifts of the wise men are mentioned being brought by kings: gold and frankincense. A lot of tradition has been built upon the Christmas story, often with creative, even poetic additions based on scripture citations and clever wordplay. It makes for good story crafting, but not good history. Canonical conundrums. If we go by traditions, we will have a hard time knowing anything about the young man who would be called Christ. So let's return to the stories that are considered sacred. If we look for the stories of Jesus' birth in the Gospels, only 2 of the 4 describe anything, Matthew and Luke. Here, apologists will clamor and tell us that the Gospel of Matthew was really written by the disciple Matthew, and therefore it's an eyewitness story of the life of Jesus. But this fails to explain the beginning of the story. After all, Matthew hasn't even met Jesus yet, and won't be called to discipleship until about 30 years later, according to Luke 3:23. So there's no way Matthew was an eyewitness to the birth of the Messiah, and that is if we assume traditional authorship. Similarly, the Gospel of Luke, supposedly written by the companion of the Apostle Paul, was no eyewitness to the Nativity. But even if these 2 Gospels are not written by people who were there at the birth of Jesus, they have the receipts, right? Well, here we get into so many issues, because not only do the stories of Jesus' nativity differ wildly between Matthew and Luke, but they outright contradict each other on important details, including the date of Jesus' birth. While neither give an exact day, Matthew places Jesus' birth in the reign of Herod the Great. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Matthew 2:1. Conversely, in Luke, timing of the birth was during a census, during the governorship of a particular figure in Syria. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Luke 2:1-2. The problem is that Herod the Great was dead by the year 4 BCE, but this census took place in 6 CE, about a decade later. Huge amounts of ink have been spilled to try and fix this problem, from suggesting that Herod died much later, to a second governorship of Quirinius, to retranslating the text to mean before the census rather than first census. All of these solutions fell upon examination. We know when Herod died, because Josephus is clear when Herod began to reign and for how many years, and the major dates of Herod's activities line up with other historical events. So we see Josephus didn't screw up. Josephus was also using Herod's own memoirs, as well as that of Herod's chief advisor, Nicholas of Damascus. So there's no way Josephus made a decade-sized error. As for the dating of Quirinius' governorship, this is not only confirmed by Josephus, but other historical sources provide a biography of this former consul of Rome. And during the time of Herod the Great, he was everywhere except Syria, and certainly not its governor. As for the changes to the translation, not only does this make no narrative sense, why date an event to say it was before a certain year rather than say what year it actually was, just like Luke does later on in Luke 3:1. But grammar rules do not allow for the proposed amendments. This glaring contradiction is hardly the only issue when comparing the accounts of Matthew and Luke. In Matthew, the Holy Family seemed to reside in the house in Bethlehem, and only afterwards are they forced to leave and then move to the Galilee. In Luke, the Holy Family are natives of Nazareth in the Galilee, and then are forced to go to Bethlehem for a census, stay in a loaned-out space, and then return as soon as completing government, business, and rituals in the temple. The two Gospels also have accounts that do not contradict, but they differ so greatly one would not think it is even possibly the same story. In Matthew, wise men from the east come to the baby, following a special star, and then everyone needs to flee the wrath of the evil King Herod. There's nothing about a choir of angels, visitations by shepherds, or a census. In Luke, however, there's nothing about a star, wise men, or even Herod as part of the birth story. Rather, a census forces Joseph and a very pregnant Mary to travel to Bethlehem, and shepherds come based on the instruction of an angel. These accounts diverge so much that it is a common premise in arguments about how well Luke knew or didn't know and used the Gospel of Matthew. However, the synoptic problem, that is, now the first three canonical Gospels literally relate to each other, is for another time. It's enough to say the argument exists because these stories are so radically different, it can only be believed by sheer apologetic and dogmatic willpower that this is all the same story. It is also not a great place to look for the events of the life of the historical Jesus. After all, the Nativity stories are full of well-worn literary tropes. The miraculous birth of the Messiah is part and parcel with so many other figures, to the point that even early Christians conceded the point. And if we affirm that he was born of a virgin, accept this in common with what you accept of Perseus, just a martyr. First Apology 22. And when we say also that the Word, who is the first birth of God, was produced without sexual union, and that he, Jesus Christ, our teacher, was crucified and died and rose again and ascended into heaven, we propound nothing different from what you believe regarding those whom you esteem sons of Jupiter. Justin Martyr, First Apology 21. The attempt on Jesus' life by Herod is also a common trope. So many great heroic figures in Greek and Roman myth had their lives on the line while infants. This includes Perseus, Heracles, Romulus, and Remus. And let's not forget the story of Moses. In the story told by Josephus, when Moses was born, Pharaoh was worried not so much by overpopulation by the Jews, but there was a prophecy about a leader who would rise up among them. And it was the attempted murder of all male infants that Pharaoh sought to prevent his nation's fate. Perhaps then, there's no wonder that in the Jesus story, the Messiah and the new Moses would also be sought out by an evil king who would slaughter all male babies trying to stop the new leader from reaching adulthood, let alone fulfilling prophecy. The birth of Jesus is usually considered the most historically implausible part of the narratives of his life. But what if we could actually cut through it all and get to facts guaranteed by science? This is part of a tradition that goes back centuries in both biblical studies as well as scientific discourse. And when one enters into the planetarium during the holiday season, you will likely be presented a narrative backed up by observations and equations to present the actual night of Jesus' birth. What does the science say? According to the Gospel of Matthew, a special light was seen by the wise men from the east. Where is he that is born, King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. Matthew 2:2. Not many details of this star are given, except that it was seen in the east, but even this has been confusing. The underlying Greek is ambiguous, and scholars have suggested it means the star was in the east, or the wise men were themselves in the east when they saw the star. But most modern translations render this not as in the east, but at its rising, suggesting a star rising. And where does this star rise? And where do stars rise? In the east, just like the sun. More details of the star are mentioned later in the gospel. Most importantly, and lo, the star, which they saw in the east, went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. Matthew 2:9. These few verses, along with a bit more context from the narrative, have been the linchpin to efforts to figure out what was this wonderful Star of Bethlehem. With the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, scholars began to look at this tale as not about a miraculous light in the sky, but something following the demonstrable and calculable, and calculatable laws of nature. If the star was really a planet in the sky, for example, perhaps we could rewind the clock and discover not only what was seen over the skies of Bethlehem 2,000 years ago, but we may find the exact day of Jesus' birth, as well as the arrival of the wise men. Many astronomers will also see their craft in play, though in a slightly different guise, because the wise men of the story is the translation of a Greek word magoi in Greek, or magi in Latin. And these magi were often considered to be astrologers, star watchers, who interpreted the skies. If we can read the skies like these ancient observers did, and then use computers to go back in time to look at the heavens, perhaps we will find Jesus in those equations. This has been the hope for many, and it is a hope one finds replenished every Christmas season in the planetarium. But do the facts bear out what many hope to find? You should probably become suspicious, since different planetariums will have different solutions to the problem. Some will say that a special alignment of the planets in 7 BCE is what is described by Matthew. Others will say it was a different alignment in 5 BCE, or others still in 2 BCE. Others may instead suggest a comet, or even an exploding star called a supernova. Even though this is the Myth Vision channel, where we explore the stories of the past, let's become astronomers for a little while. All of the stars in the sky appear to move around us in circles, traveling from east to west. For those in the northern hemisphere, the stars close to Polaris, also called the North Star, do not rise or set. All others disappear below and reappear above the horizon. When those stars rise and set changes throughout the year, but dependably and predictably. Certain constellations are visible all throughout the night during certain times of the year, but then do not appear at all during the night. For example, the constellation of Orion, the Hunter, is called a winter constellation for northerners. During the cold months, you can generally see Orion from sunset to sunrise, but in the summer, you likely don't see Orion at all. Conversely, the constellation of Aquila, the Eagle, is a summer constellation. The timing of the rising and setting of those stars is all because of the rotation of the Earth and the revolution of the Earth around the Sun. All of the constellations are collections of stars connected together in the imagination because of the images they appear to make. Ancient people imagined all of the stars as attached to a solid dome or sphere, making all of these stars about the same distance away from you. However, the actual stars we can see with the naked eye differ in distance by huge amounts. The closest star to our solar system, called Proxima Centauri, is about 4 light years away. That is at the cosmic speed limit. It takes over 4 years to get from Earth to this star. With rocket technology, it would take closer to 100,000 years, and this is the closest star. Other visible stars, such as Rho Cassiopeia, are thousands of light years away, literally galaxy 1,000 times further. More stars in the galaxy are further away still, as our galaxy is about 90,000 light years across. However, the most distant object the naked eye can see is another galaxy in the constellation of Andromeda at a distance of over 2.5 million light years. This is also just what the human eye can see. The depth of the universe breaks the imagination and fills it with awe and wonder. The universe is grander than anything in the ancient imagination. While the Old Testament speaks of a hard dome over the flat earth, and the ancient Greeks and Romans thoughts of planetary spheres, our technology and mathematical models expand our reach beyond any rakia and crystalline sphere. The sky is not the limit, as we can travel to the planets on rockets, peer into the earliest light in the universe older than the sun and moon by billions of years, and track the motions of the galaxies across the cosmos formed out of the afterglow of spectacular chaos. One could only wish the biblical writers could even fathom the actual glory of the universe. For now, let's return close to home and seek out what we can see. Looking again with the naked eye, there are several points of light that are brighter than most stars, but they move in odd ways. If plotting their position over many nights, one can see that they are not in the same place relative to the other stars. Generally, they seem to move from west to east against the background rotation of the sky from east to west. However, sometimes those lights will reverse direction, moving east to west, even against the normal rotation of the sky, and then reverse again. These wandering lights are called planets, and their title is derived from the Greek word for wandering, planetes, from planao. Several planets are identified in prehistoric times, and we today call them after the names of Roman gods: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Only with the advent of the telescope did we confirm the existence of Uranus and Neptune, along with many more bodies orbiting the sun. The motions of the planets are complex, but their back and forth patterns are due to the fact that the Earth and all of the planets orbit the sun. The orbits of the planets are now precisely known, and their positions thousands of years into the future and past can be accurately predicted. One other observation ancient astronomers noted is that the planets all appeared to move across the sky in a particular band of constellations, and the sun and moon would also appear to travel along that same band. This circle of constellations would become the zodiac, 12 signs that are integral to astrology, not to be confused with the science of astronomy. In antiquity, there was not a hard distinction between these two. Basically, all astronomers were astrologers, trying to figure out what the stars meant or what would happen in human affairs. By the time of Christianity, astronomers in the Greco-Roman world would predict pretty well where the planets would be on a given night. If you asked an astronomer to create a chart of where the planets were on the date of your birth, bearing some calculation errors, they would be pretty close to correctly locating them. However, not everything was so predictable. Sometimes long, fuzzy stars would streak through the skies. These were called comets, from the Greek word for hair, kometes. In the past, the origins of comets was unknown, and philosophers like Aristotle thought they were atmospheric phenomena. Today, we know that comets, like the planets, also orbit the sun, but their paths are not as round, nor do they all fall in the same orbital plane as the planets. Comets are balls, largely of dust, water, and frozen carbon dioxide. When they are far from the sun, they are cold and inert. When they get closer, the water and dry ice begins to heat up and shoot off, creating the primary tail of the comet. Some comets have orbital periods on the order of a human lifetime, such as the famous Halley's Comet and its 75-year orbit. Others will not return for thousands of years. Since comets were not understood in antiquity, no one could predict when or where you would see a comet. This is not the only unpredictable sight. Occasionally, a new star will appear, sometimes as bright as Venus. In ancient China, they were called guest stars, as if the sky just got a new temporary roommate. In the West, these new stars became known as novas or novae, literally from the Latin word for new. No one living today has seen a nova with the naked eye, as there has not been a new star seen in the night sky since 1604. But you might want to look up tonight, because most astronomers think we are overdue. What a new star is can be several possibilities, but they are all explosive. The smaller versions are a temporary surface explosion. This can happen if there are two stars close enough to each other that they pull material from each other because of their gravity. In particular, if one of the stars is something like our sun and the other is a white dwarf, a small but dense remnant of a star, then the white dwarf can pull gas from the normal star, and that gas builds up enough on the white dwarf surface to suddenly undergo nuclear fusion and explode. But this is only the small version of an explosion. In an event known as a supernova, the entire star explodes with a level of energy that matches the output of an entire galaxy of stars. This was the case in 1604, and others have been recorded in ancient astronomical records in both the East and the West. Like the comet, no one in the past could predict when and where a new star would be seen, and even today astronomers cannot tell you exactly when to expect a nova or supernova. We do know some stars are getting ready for a spectacular death, but even when a star is close to exploding, we may not see it happen for hundreds of thousands of years. All of this is to set up the major possibilities for what could have been seen in the skies close to the time of Jesus' birth. With astronomy software, we can pinpoint where any of the planets were in the sky at any day or hour. With historical records, we can identify the most impressive comets and novae that would have been in the sky as well. By reconstructing the heavens on any given night, that might match the description of the Christmas star. Scientific facts or mythologized science. The problem in connecting astronomical events to the Gospel of Matthew is how to interpret the text. When Matthew says the star was rising when seen by the wise men, does he mean it was the first time the star was rising and it was seen just before dawn's early light made it invisible? When the star was said to go before the wise men, does this mean the star was seen in the direction of Bethlehem from Jerusalem? Or does this mean the star was going in a certain direction? Astronomers are not trained to read Greek, nor do they read widely in classical sources, so their interpretations are not well informed. One of the reasons there are so many explanations for the Christmas star is because different astronomers will read the words in a different way, and yet very few know the underlying language, while also pontificating that they understand it better than what is found in standard translations. Otherwise, the claim is to not take the text literally, a text most of them literally cannot read. When apologists get their hands on the text, they will either allude to the scientist discussing it as a source of legitimization, or they will disparage the author of the Gospel of Matthew. For example, in the 19th century, Henry Alford said that the Gospel used universally inaccurate language. In the 20th, J. Gresham Machen said it's a baldly literal reading of the text was to make the story seem silly on purpose. Funny how apologists tell us to believe the Gospels are literal history, except when that seems silly. With a lack of knowledge of the language, the flexibility in nonetheless interpreting the text, and the sparse details in the Gospel, the last astronomer, David Hughes, stated rather interestingly, "There are few facts to cramp one style." David Hughes, Review Symposium, The Star of Bethlehem, Journal for the History of Astronomy 33. Equally problematic is how we think ancient people would have interpreted these signs in the sky. If we don't use good sources from the past and we just speculate what the stars meant to the ancients, we are just imposing on the past. For example, the astronomers who suggest that the Star of Bethlehem was a comet have to explain why a comet in 5 BCE was considered the sign of the coming of the King of the Jews, when usually ancient people interpreted a comet as the sign of death and destruction. Comets are usually a sign of death, but this time was different, so the special pleading goes. For those looking to use astrology to figure out how the motions of the planets would have been understood, they will find only confusion. Astrology is based on plenty of mathematics to figure out where the planets are, but the interpretation is less reliable than a poorly translated fortune cookie. Astrology books from Greeks and Romans are filled with contradictions predictions and no step-by-step method of interpretation. When testing astrologers, not only do they not predict the future any better than chance, but their agreement on what a start chart means is almost no better than chance. Really, when given the same charts and the same personality exams, astrologers match up those personalities to charts no better than chance, and their choices of which charts go with which personalities is almost no better than chance. So what does a given horoscope mean? Whatever you want it to. And if that were not bad enough, we know that the actual magi from the East were not astrologers. The term was used for the priest of the Persian religion named after its prophet Zoroaster, and the Zoroastrian literature was either uncaring towards or hostile against astrology. The planets were evil entities corrupted by the equivalent of Satan, and there are no signs of interest in planetary astronomy or astrology until centuries after the time of Jesus. So why did Matthew say that magi were following a star? This kind of gives the game away, showing the gospel author was inventing based on cultural norms rather than history. In the West, the term magus had broadened its meaning for any alleged magic user or charlatan, while Greeks who loved to do flimsy etymologies thought that the prophet Zoroaster was an astrologer because of his name. The Greek word for star, aster, means Zoroaster was a star watcher, or so the imagination went. In reality, this isn't the prophet's actual name, but this sort of wordplay created an entire genre of pseudepigraphic, magical, and astrological literature, claiming the knowledge of the Persian prophet. In other words, the author of the Gospel of Matthew has fallen into believing false things about the East because of the literature in the West. It would be like an American thinking everyone in Afghanistan speaks Arabic because the country is majority Muslim. If you read a story about life in Kandahar and everyone is speaking Arabic instead of Pashto, that's a pretty good sign you're reading stereotyped fiction. What this means is that the Nativity story is built upon Greco-Roman stereotypes of Easterns instead of actual historical events. Whoops. This also means looking for astrological explanations for the Star of Bethlehem is not going to be successful because the alleged planet watchers were in historical reality no such thing. And that's not even the worst strike against astronomical and astrological theories about Christmas. If we stick to the text of the gospel and its actual meaning, there's no room for the astronomer to help. This star was truly magical, as it not only traveled south from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, while all stars moved from east to west. Moreover, it stopped in place and hovered over one particular house, and not hovered up high in the sky, but it was at rooftop level. No, this is not a hyperbolic way of describing normal astronomical observations. The miraculous description of the star is how all ancient and medieval readers interpreted the text. In fact, the star becomes only more wondrous in later stories. For example, in the infancy Gospel of James, the Holy Family is residing in a cave, and the star entered into the cave and hovered right over Jesus' head. In a later story called The Revelation of the Magi, the star is baby Jesus himself, meeting and talking to the Magi while they were in the east. That star then acts as their guiding light. So Jesus led the Magi to baby Jesus. Sounds like standard astronomy, right? Of course not. We are clearly dealing with the fantastical, and that is what the Star of Bethlehem was, a magical GPS unit pinpointing one particular house in Bethlehem. But if we have the fantastical, what inspired the fantasy? Mythical origins in Rome. There are numerous stories of guiding stars if we look around the ancient Mediterranean. One common motif for sailors was the guiding light of the divine twins, Castor and Pollux, collectively called the Dioscuri. Here is one such account. But there came on a great storm, and the chieftains had given up hope of being saved, when Orpheus, they say, who was the only one on the shipboard who had ever been initiated in the mysteries of the deities of Samothrace, offered offered to these deities the prayers for their salvation. And immediately the wind died down, and 2 stars fell over the heads of the Dioscuri. And the whole company was amazed at the marvel which had taken place, and concluded they had been rescued from their perils by an act of providence of the gods. For this reason, the story of this reversal of fortune for the Argonauts has been handed down to succeeding generations, and sailors, when caught in storms, always direct their prayers to the deities of Samothrace and attribute the appearance of the 2 stars to the epiphany of the Dioscuri. Diodorus Siculus, Bibliotheca Historica 443. This tale of a voyage by the legendary musician Orpheus was hardly left to the mythic past, as stories of the Dioscuri appearing as guiding stars were told of the Spartan generals Timoleon, 4th century BC, and Lysander, 5th century BC. Both of these men had detailed biographies written by Plutarch in the 2nd century, and Plutarch is just one of the sources describing these guiding stars. But an even greater light was the guide of one of the most important heroes in Roman myth, Aeneas. This survivor of the Trojan War needed divine help to find a place as a new home for himself and his fellow Trojans. As a child of Venus, he could expect his mom to help. Here's how the prayer of Aeneas, his father, Anchises, was portrayed in the national epic of Rome, the Aeneid. Anchises, with exultant eyes, looked heavenward and lifted to the stars his voice in outstretched hands. Almighty Jove, if aught of prayer may move thee, let thy grace now visit us. Oh, hear this holy vow, and if for service at thine altars done, we aught can claim, O Father, lend us aid, and ratify the omen thou hast given. Scarce ceased his aged voice, when suddenly, from leftward, with a deafening thunder peal, cleaving the blackness of the vaulted sky, a meteor star in trailing splendor ran, exceeding bright. We watched it glide sublime o'er tower and town, until its radiant beam in forest mantled Ida died away, but left a furrow on its track in air, a glittering long line, while far and wide the sulphurous fume and exaltation flowed. My father strove not now, but lifted him in prayer to all the gods, in holy awe of that auspicious star, and thus exclaimed, Tarry no moment more, behold I come, whithersoe'er ye lead, my steps obey. Gods of my fathers, O preserve our name, preserve my son and his. This augury is yours, and Troy on your sole strength relies. I yield, dear son, I journey at thy side. Virgil, Aeneid 2. I think the similarities with the gospel account are clear, but let's have them really shine through. We have the appearance of a star leading to exceedingly great joy because of its appearance and movements, and it acts as a guide to their new kingdom. That new kingdom would be to the west of their starting point, going from Anatolia to Rome. The parallelism with the gospel is thus a star leading to exceedingly great joy because of its appearance and movements, and it acts as a guide to the new king, and that new king was found to the west of the travelers, the wise men from the east. This version of the guiding star of Aeneas was not original to Virgil, as the ancient commentator Servius the grammarian noted. In the original version, the guiding light was Venus as the morning star. That is an interesting point, because the Christmas star was seen at its rising, and this may mean it was also a morning star, rising in the eastern sky. The star of Aeneas was also important to Roman politics, because its imagery was now reflecting another important star, the star of Julius Caesar. On the Ides of March 44 BCE, Caesar, having already been made dictator for life by the Senate, was stabbed to death by members of that same Senate. During the funeral games set in his honor, a new star was seen in the sky. We have observations of this star from multiple sources, both in Rome and as far away as China, so we know it was real, and we know what it was. This new star was a comet, appearing at times with little or no tail, so it was hard to know if it was the ominous hairy star or a glorious sign in the sky. The lovers of Caesar, especially his adopted son Octavian, pushed the narrative that this star was Caesar's soul being taken up to heaven, lifted up by Venus herself. The Lilius Cetus, or Julian star, would become an icon of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, a symbol in the temple devoted to Caesar. and worn on the helm of the Emperor Augustus. The coinage of Augustus would include the star, indications of its flaming tail, and inscribed in Latin that this was the sign of the divine Julius, making Augustus the son of a god. We thus see the imagery of a magnificent flaming star in the myth of Aeneas and his guiding star. We know the Star of Bethlehem was understood by Christians as comparable to the Star of Aeneas because some made that exact comparison. This is seen in a rewritten gospel using only quotes from the works of Virgil as produced by a Christian woman named Faltonia Baptistia Proba in her Cento Virginalis de Laudibus Christi. I probably butchered that, but the title's on the screen. Virgilian Cento praising Christ. She took the very lines from the Aeneid about the guiding star as the description of the star of the Magi. In other words, the Star of Bethlehem, acting as a guiding morning star to a new king of the world, was a powerful symbol, understandable in its Greco-Roman environment, but incomprehensible as a literal astronomical phenomenon. Star of David, Star of Christ. Most good stories have more than one source of inspiration, and students in Greco-Roman antiquity were taught to emulate more than one model in their writing at a time. So it should be no surprise if the author of the Gospel of Matthew emulated not just important Roman myths, but also Jewish scriptures. This is perhaps most obvious when we read the so-called star prophecy given by the seer named Balaam. I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Numbers 24:17. This passage was popularly interpreted as predicting the coming of the Messiah. It is cited multiple times in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it was part of the propaganda of the rebel leader Simon Bar Kokhba, his name meaning son of the star. In the Greek translation of this passage, the word scepter is replaced with man, indicating the star was a person. In one Aramaic phrase, the word scepter is replaced with king. In the original context, the prophecy was about King David. So would it not be fitting that the son of David, born in David's city, would have a star lead to the newborn Messiah? Come on, people. Ancient commentaries by Christians on the Nativity story consistently noted the connection between the Christmas star and the star prophecy. In one of the oldest pieces of Christian art, deep in the Roman catacombs of Priscilla, Mary is seen holding her child with a star above them. Pointing to the star is one man, most likely the prophet Balaam himself. The Magi are seen elsewhere in the catacombs. It seems clear to the early Christians that Jesus' star was in fulfillment of the star prophecy. And we know that Matthew loved to indicate how this or that thing happened in fulfillment of Scripture. So we can be pretty comfortable in the idea that the story was written to make sure Jesus was such a fulfillment. The star is thus myth, created from Old Testament prophecy and Roman political legends. Clear as day, right? Just one more thing. There is one detail that remains a mystery. In the star prophecy, the star is not a separate light in the sky, but it was supposed to be the Messiah himself. This can be seen not just in other Jewish sources, but also in the New Testament. After all, in 2 books, Jesus is called the morning star. Revelation 22:16 and 2 Peter 1:19. We even saw that in the non-canonical revelation of the Magi, baby Jesus was also the star. In another hymn, as recited by the Bishop Ignatius of Antioch in the 2nd century, Jesus was a new, bright star in the heavens. What do we make of this? Might there be a connection between the story of Jesus as a star and a star at the birth of Jesus? And if so, in what direction might influence go? Was there first a story of Jesus as a star that was transformed into the Christmas star story? Or was the story of the Bethlehem star made even more mythical to turn Jesus into a star? Here we behold a true mystery. Perhaps then our exploration of the origins of this Yuletide tale is not yet over, but we will have many more Christmases to explore the mythic superstructure of the Bible and the figure of Jesus. Until then, have a happy holiday filled with cheer and perhaps a few good stories around the fireplace. Conclusion. That concludes our exploration of the mythic origins and astronomical explanations for the Star of Bethlehem. As we've seen, this beloved tale intertwines history, scripture, legend, and science in intriguing ways. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the Myth Vision channel for more investigations into biblical myths and mysteries. Also click the like button to support future content. We welcome your comments and questions below. For an in-depth examination of the Nativity myths from a skeptical perspective, be sure to grab a copy of Dr. Aaron Adair's book, The Star of Bethlehem, A Skeptical View. It provides a thorough analysis of the ancient sources and science behind the birth of Jesus legends. Consider joining Myth Vision's Patreon community or becoming a YouTube member to unlock exclusive content as well as influence upcoming topics. And if you'd like to offer one-time donation in support of the channel, you could do so via the info in the description. However you choose to contribute, we greatly appreciate your support in our quest to examine sacred stories through various lenses. From all of us at Myth Vision, thanks for watching and happy holidays. Oh, and never forget, we are Myth Vision.